When something is always present, always accessible, always predictable, the human mind begins to take it for granted. This is not a flaw, it is simply the way we are wired. The more familiar something is, the less value we consciously assign to it. This is why people only truly appreciate something when it is gone. The same principle applies to relationships, particularly when it comes to attraction and emotional longing. A woman does not start to miss a man who is constantly in her presence, always available, always eager to prove his worth to her. Instead, she starts to miss him when she feels the discomfort of his absence, when she notices that the space he once occupied is now empty, and when she realizes that she cannot so easily fill that void. This is why men who cling desperately to a woman, who overextend themselves to seek her validation, who ensure they are always reachable, often find themselves being ignored, overlooked, or even discarded. It is not because they are necessarily unworthy, but because their presence is taken as a given. There is no sense of urgency, no feeling of potential loss, but when that presence is no longer guaranteed, when a man steps back, when he stops trying, when he shifts his focus away from the woman and toward his own life, everything changes. It is not about playing games or manipulating emotions. It is about recognizing the psychological reality of human nature. People rarely appreciate what is always there. It is the very act of stepping away that forces someone to reevaluate what they once overlooked. A woman begins to miss a man when she realizes that his presence was not something she should have assumed would always be available. She starts to question why he is no longer reaching out, why he is not chasing, why he is not waiting. And in that questioning, she begins to feel something she did not expect: uncertainty. Uncertainty is the catalyst for longing. When a woman is certain that a man will always be there, her mind does not dwell on him. She does not have to wonder. But the moment he removes himself from her life in a meaningful way, the moment he stops seeking her attention, the moment he redirects his energy towards something greater than her validation, she begins to feel that uncertainty creeping in, and uncertainty leads to curiosity. Curiosity is powerful. When someone is curious about you, they think about you. They wonder what you are doing, why you are not reacting the way they expected, why you are no longer behaving in a way that confirms their assumptions. And that curiosity quickly evolves into attraction, because attraction thrives in the space between certainty and mystery. When a woman starts to feel that she does not fully understand a man's motivations anymore, when she senses that she may have misjudged his level of interest, when she begins to wonder whether she was too quick to assume he would always be there, this is when she starts to miss him. And then the most interesting thing happens. When a man removes himself from a situation, he does not just create a void in her life, he forces her to confront her own decisions. If she took him for granted, if she treated him as though his presence did not matter, she now has to face the reality of that choice. Was she right to assume she could replace him? Was she right to believe that she would not feel his absence? Was she right to assume that he would always be an option? These are not comfortable thoughts, but they are necessary ones. When a man is too readily available, a woman does not have to question these things. She does not have to reflect, to analyze, to consider whether she made the right decision. But when he is no longer there, when his attention is no longer freely given, she has to sit with those thoughts. And in that reflection, she begins to see what she once ignored: the impact he had on her life, the presence he brought, the way he made her feel. And this is where the missing begins. It does not happen instantly. It happens slowly, gradually, like a realization creeping into her mind. At first, it is just a passing thought. Then it becomes a question. Then it becomes an ache. And then, before she even understands it fully, she finds herself longing for something she thought she had moved on from. But here is the crucial distinction. A man does not make a woman miss him by pretending to be absent while secretly hoping for her to notice. He does not sit in the shadows waiting for her to come back. That is not absence. That is still attachment. The real effect only happens when he genuinely steps away, not as a tactic, but as a byproduct of his own growth. When he stops making her the center of his world, when he stops placing his self-worth in her hands, when he starts focusing on his own development, his own purpose, his own fulfillment, that is when she truly starts to feel his absence. Because now she is not just missing the man she knew, she is missing the man he is becoming, the man she no longer has access to, the man who is no longer available to her on demand. And this is what creates true value. A man who knows his worth does not need to chase, does not need to convince, does not need to plead for attention. His presence alone is valuable, and when that presence is gone, it is felt. And that feeling is what changes everything. Because when a woman starts to miss a man, it is not just nostalgia, it is not just longing, it is a reevaluation of her own choices, a realization of what she may have let go, and a questioning of whether she made a mistake. And in that moment, the man who once seemed replaceable now seems irreplaceable, not because he said something, not because he did something, but because he became something, something greater, something stronger, something that no longer needs her validation to exist. Desire does not come from abundance, it comes from scarcity. This is one of the fundamental truths of human nature that many people fail to understand. When something is always available, when it is easy to obtain, when it is within reach at all times, it loses its value. The mind is wired to assign worth to things that are rare, things that require effort to attain, things that are not guaranteed. This is why a woman does not feel desire for a man who is constantly seeking her attention, always present, always chasing. Instead, she feels desire when she perceives him as someone who is not easily accessible, someone who is not desperately vying for her validation, but is instead moving forward with his own life, focused on things that are bigger than her approval. When a man is readily available at all times, a woman does not have to think about him. He is predictable. He is there when she wants him, and that predictability robs him of mystery, of intrigue, of the ability to stir emotions within her. There is no sense of urgency, no sense of potential loss, no reason for her to reflect on his value. But when a man steps back, when he removes himself from the equation, when he is no longer easily accessible, the dynamic shifts. Suddenly, she is left wondering. Suddenly, she begins to notice his absence. And that absence creates desire. The reason for this is simple. People crave what they cannot easily have. The moment something is taken away, the mind assigns it a new level of importance. This is why people mourn what they lose, even if they once took it for granted. This is why people only recognize the true value of something when it is gone. And this is exactly why a woman starts to feel drawn to a man when he is no longer making himself available to her in the way he once did. It is not because she wants to play games. It is not because she is manipulative, it is because her perception of his value has changed. When a man constantly seeks a woman's approval, he inadvertently tells her that his worth is dependent on her validation. He signals that she holds power over him, that her attention is the most important thing to him. And in doing so, he lowers his perceived value. But when a man prioritizes himself, when he focuses on his own growth, his own ambitions, his own path, he sends a very different message. He is not dependent on her recognition to feel significant. He does not need her attention to feel valuable. And that is what makes him attractive. A man who is focused on himself, on his purpose, on his mission, is naturally more desirable than a man who places his entire sense of self-worth in the hands of a woman. This is because a woman is drawn to strength, to independence, to a sense of purpose that exists outside of her. When she sees that a man is not waiting for her to make a decision, that he is not putting her approval at every turn, she begins to see him differently. He becomes a challenge. He becomes someone worth pursuing. He becomes someone who is not easily replaced. This is not about manipulation. It is about understanding the psychology of attraction. When something is rare, when it is not easily acquired, it becomes more valuable. This applies to everything in life, from material possessions to personal relationships. If a man gives away his attention freely, if he makes himself too available, if he is constantly seeking reassurance, he is not seen as rare, he is seen as common, as someone who can be taken for granted. But when he withholds that attention, not as a game, but as a natural consequence of his own self-respect, he becomes someone worth thinking about, someone worth missing. And this is where the shift happens. When a woman starts to perceive a man as valuable, when she starts to see him as someone who is not easily attainable, she begins to feel drawn to him. She begins to wonder why he is no longer seeking her out. She begins to question whether she misjudged his level of interest. And in doing so, she starts to feel something she did not expect: desire. Desire is born out of uncertainty. It is not created by comfort or predictability. It is created by a sense of longing, by the feeling that something valuable might slip away. This is why relationships that are built on constant pursuit often fizzle out. When a man overextends himself, when he makes it clear that he is always available, when he puts himself in a position where he is constantly seeking a woman's validation, he removes that sense of uncertainty. She knows he is there. She knows he will always be there. And because of that, she does not feel the need to think about him, to wonder about him, to desire him. But when that certainty is taken away, when he steps back, when he no longer makes himself available, she is forced to reassess. She starts to feel a sense of loss, a sense of something missing. And in that feeling, she begins to assign more value to his presence. It is not that she did not appreciate him before. It is that she never had to consider what life would be like without him. And now that she does, now that she realizes his attention is not guaranteed, she starts to crave it in a way she never did before. This is the paradox of human attraction. People do not chase what is handed to them on a silver platter. They chase what they feel they might lose. And the moment a woman starts to feel that she might be losing a man, the moment she starts to sense that he is slipping away, that is the moment she starts to miss him. Not because he forced her to, not because he played games, but because his absence created the space for her to feel that longing on her own. And that is the key. It has to happen naturally. A man cannot fake this. He cannot pretend to be distant while secretly hoping she will come running back. He cannot play the role of the unavailable man while still being emotionally attached to her every action. The only way this works is if he genuinely understands his own value, if he genuinely prioritizes his own life over seeking her approval. And when he does that, when he truly focuses on himself, when he truly becomes someone who is not dependent on her validation, she will feel the shift. And she will start to desire him, not because he told her to, not because he tried to make her, but because the mind is wired to crave what it cannot easily have. People underestimate the power of emotional contrast in relationships. They assume that attraction is based purely on logic, that if a man is good to a woman, if he is available, if he provides support, she will naturally gravitate toward him. But this is not how human psychology works. People do not respond to predictability with passion. They respond to moments of uncertainty, to emotional highs and lows, to the feeling that something valuable might slip through their fingers if they do not act. When a woman experiences a loss, when she feels that a man who once valued her is no longer as invested, her emotions begin to shift. She starts to feel the weight of that absence, and in doing so, she begins to experience an emotional contrast that reignites her sense of attraction. People are wired to notice change. If something remains constant, the brain filters it out. It becomes background noise, something that no longer commands attention. But when that same thing is removed, when a consistent presence suddenly disappears, it disrupts the pattern. It forces a reevaluation. This is why absence creates desire. It shifts the emotional experience. When a man steps back, when he no longer prioritizes a woman in the way she was accustomed to, she is forced to process a new reality, one in which his presence is no longer guaranteed, and that change makes her notice what she previously took for granted. This is why relationships often feel more intense after periods of separation. It is not that the people involved suddenly become more attractive or more valuable in an objective sense. It is that their absence creates contrast. A woman who was used to a man's presence, who assumed he would always be there, suddenly finds herself without that familiarity, and in that space she begins to feel the weight of his absence in ways she never anticipated. This emotional contrast is what makes people reconsider their feelings. When a man is always available, when he is always present, a woman does not have to think about what life would be like without him. She does not have to evaluate his importance. She does not have to reflect on the value he brings. But the moment he steps back, the moment she realizes that his attention is no longer a given, her mind starts working in a different way. She begins to focus on what she lost. She begins to analyze her own emotions. She starts to question whether she made a mistake. Attraction is not built on certainty. It is built on contrast. It is the difference between presence and absence, between comfort and uncertainty, between knowing something is there and fearing it might not always be. This is why relationships that lack emotional contrast tend to fizzle out over time. When there is no risk, no sense of something being at stake, the mind does not assign as much value to the experience. But when there is uncertainty, when there is the possibility of loss, the experience becomes more meaningful. This is also why relationships that experience turbulence tend to be so emotionally intense. It is not the turmoil itself that creates attraction, it is the contrast. The highs feel higher because there are lows. The moments of connection feel deeper because there have been moments of disconnection. And this principle applies even in the absence of conflict. When a man pulls back, when he focuses on himself, when he removes the certainty of his presence, he creates a new emotional dynamic. He introduces an element of contrast, and in doing so, he changes the way a woman perceives him. A woman who once felt indifferent toward a man, who assumed he would always be there, suddenly starts to view him differently when he is no longer as available. She starts to wonder why he changed. She starts to question what happened, and in doing so, she begins to feel an emotional shift that was not present before. This is not because he became more valuable overnight. It is because the contrast forced her to recognize his value in a way she had not before. This is also why people often feel nostalgia for past relationships after time has passed. It is not that the relationship itself was necessarily better than they thought. It is that the contrast between what was and what is now forces them to reevaluate. Absence magnifies positive memories because it creates emotional distance from the negative ones. The mind is wired to focus on what is missing rather than what was flawed. This is why a woman might suddenly start missing a man she once dismissed, why she might begin to wonder if she made a mistake, why she might feel a renewed sense of longing for something she previously overlooked. The key to making this process work is authenticity. A man cannot manufacture absence simply to trigger a reaction. If he is stepping back purely as a manipulation tactic, it will fail. A woman can sense when something is being done for effect rather than out of genuine self-respect. But when a man truly shifts his focus, when he genuinely prioritizes his own life over seeking her validation, when he creates that emotional contrast because he is actually moving forward rather than waiting for her approval, that is when the dynamic changes. People respond to authenticity. A woman is not going to feel longing for a man who is playing games. She is not going to reevaluate her feelings if she senses that he is pulling away just to make her chase him. But she will feel the difference if his absence is real, if he truly has other things to focus on, if he is genuinely prioritizing himself, if he is not waiting for her reaction. And that is when the emotional contrast becomes real. The moment a woman realizes that a man is no longer waiting for her, the moment she senses that he has truly shifted his focus away from her, she begins to reassess. She begins to feel the impact of his absence. And in doing so, she starts to experience something she did not expect: longing. Not because she was forced to, not because he manipulated her into feeling it, but because the emotional contrast made her see him in a new light. Human beings are deeply wired to seek validation, and this is particularly true in relationships. Women, like men, want to feel valued, admired, and desired. When a woman leaves a man or distances herself, she does so for a variety of reasons. Sometimes out of frustration, sometimes out of a desire to test her own emotions, sometimes because she believes she is making the right choice. But what happens after that decision is made is not always within her control. There is a psychological reality that begins to emerge, one that is often underestimated. The need for validation does not simply disappear after separation. In fact, it can intensify. At first, there may be relief, a sense of freedom, a belief that she has taken a necessary step forward. But as time passes, something begins to shift. The absence of validation from a man who once admired her, who once made her feel special, creates a psychological void. This is not just about romance, it is about identity. People construct their self-perception based on how they are viewed by those around them. When a man was once a significant source of validation, and that validation is suddenly removed, a woman begins to feel that loss in unexpected ways. This is one of the reasons why women often return after walking away. They are not necessarily coming back for the same reasons they left. They are coming back because they feel an absence of something they once had. It is easy to underestimate the power of emotional reinforcement. When a man was once a source of admiration, when he once expressed his appreciation, his love, his desire, those feelings became part of her self-possession. When he is no longer there to reflect those feelings back to her, she begins to wonder what that means. It is not always a conscious thought. It is often a subtle shift, a creeping feeling that something is missing. This is why people check in on their past partners, why they send seemingly casual messages, why they bring up old memories. They want to see if that validation is still available, if that admiration still exists. And when a man does not respond in the way they expect, when he no longer places them on the pedestal they were once on, it creates a psychological conflict. If he no longer sees her in the same way, if he no longer validates her in the same way, what does that mean for her sense of self? This is why emotional contrast is so powerful. It is not just about making someone miss you, it is about disrupting the pattern of validation they once relied on. When a man reacts emotionally to a woman pulling away, when he chases, when he seeks reassurance, he reinforces her decision to leave. He tells her in essence that she still holds the same power over him, that she still has the same significance in his world. But when a man truly steps back, when he moves forward with his own life, when he no longer provides that same emotional reinforcement, it forces a woman to question her assumptions. This is not about manipulation, it is about human psychology. People crave reassurance. They want to feel like they matter. And when that reassurance disappears, they begin to search for it. This is why people return to old relationships. It is not always about love or regret. Sometimes it is about restoring a sense of self-worth. When a woman realizes that a man she once left has stopped waiting, that he has moved on, that he no longer validates her in the same way, she begins to feel the absence of something she took for granted. The interesting thing about validation is that it is most powerful when it is not freely given. When something is always available, it loses its impact. But when it is removed, when it becomes uncertain, when it is no longer predictable, it becomes significantly more valuable. This is why people chase what they cannot have. It is not necessarily about the object of their desire. It is about what that desire represents. A woman who feels the absence of validation does not necessarily want to be with a man again in a practical sense. She may not even be thinking about the relationship in terms of long-term commitment, but she does want to restore a sense of value, a sense of importance. She wants to know that she could still have that validation if she wanted it. And when she cannot access it as easily as before, she begins to feel the pull of curiosity, the urge to reach out, the desire to see if what was once there still exists. This is why some of the most powerful moments in relationships happen after separation. The emotions that emerge are not always about love or regret. They are often about self-perception. When a woman who once felt adored no longer receives that adoration, when a man who once prioritized her no longer makes her a priority, it forces her to look inward. It forces her to ask difficult questions. Did she make the right choice? Is she still valued in the same way? Has she lost something she once had? People are drawn to what validates their self-worth. This is why a woman may not miss a man immediately after leaving, but as time passes and that validation fades, she starts to feel its absence more strongly. And when she reaches out, when she tests the waters, when she tries to see if that validation is still there, she is not just looking for a man's attention. She is looking for a reflection of herself. She wants to know that she is still as desirable, as important, as valued as she once was. A man who understands this does not chase, does not seek reassurance, does not try to force validation where it is no longer freely given. Instead, he focuses on himself, on his own value, on his own growth. And in doing so, he becomes someone whose validation is not easily obtained. That is the key. People do not long for what they can have at any moment. They long for what they fear they may have lost. And when a woman starts to feel that absence, when she starts to realize that the validation she once had is no longer guaranteed, she begins to experience something she did not expect. The desire to get it back. People are drawn to what affirms their value, and when that affirmation disappears, they begin to feel its absence in ways they did not anticipate. A woman who returns after hurting a man is often not just seeking reconciliation, but searching for the validation she once received. It is not always about love or regret. It is about self-perception, about the need to restore a sense of significance. When a man does not chase, does not plead, does not remain an emotional crutch, he forces her to confront the reality that she may have lost something she once took for granted. This is not about playing games. It is about understanding human nature. The most powerful validation is not freely given, but earned through self-respect, growth, and independence. And when a man truly embraces this, he becomes someone that others cannot easily forget.